In a village forgotten by time, a girl who's never heard her own voice and a young woman scarred by pride are brought together by an old dog and an unexpected act. But when danger lurks in the woods, it's silence that reveals the greatest power of all. Welcome to the channel. Before you begin, like and subscribe so we can continue creating stories like this one. The village of Pine Valley, nestled among the Blue Ridge Mountains in Virginia, remained discreetly detached from the frantic life of big cities. There, where time seemed to move at its own pace, the scent of dogwood and redbud trees filled the mornings, and the sunset over the mountains created daily spectacles for its few inhabitants. In that place of colorful houses, cobblestone streets, and a single central square with an old gazebo, all 50 families knew each other. Greetings were constant, embraces were warm, and secrets, well, secrets didn't last long in that paradisiacal corner of America. Among the residents, there was one figure who inspired special affection: Emily Stevens, a 7-year-old girl who, although living in constant silence due to congenital deafness, communicated with the world around her with an intensity that many considered almost magical. Mrs. Martha and Mr. George, Emily's maternal grandparents, had taken over her upbringing after her parents, desperate for more advanced treatments, moved to Boston and ended up building a new life there. The visits, initially frequent, became scarce until only cards on commemorative dates remained. "She has a way of understanding people that even those who can hear don't manage," commented Mrs. Martha while watching her granddaughter on the porch, drawing in her inseparable little notebook. "It's as if she reads people's souls through their eyes." Emily had adapted to her condition with wisdom beyond her years. She always carried a small notepad hanging around her neck where she drew or wrote to communicate. She had also learned a simplified version of American Sign Language taught by Ms. Rachel, who traveled weekly from the neighboring town exclusively for this purpose. The village, in its simplicity, had adopted the girl as a symbol of resilience. Even the most energetic children slowed down to include her in their games, creating their own gestures that only they understood. The peaceful routine of Pine Valley was abruptly transformed one July morning when a brand new black Jeep parked in front of the old Thompson house, which had been closed for almost a decade. From the vehicle emerged a middle-aged woman with an air of authority, followed by a young woman who made no effort to hide her displeasure in every movement. "Finally, we've arrived at this place," said the young woman, observing the rustic buildings around her with disdain. "Victoria, behave yourself. Remember what your father said," warned the older woman, organizing the luggage that the driver was unloading. "It will be just a few months until everything calms down." Victoria Reynolds, 19 years old, sole heir to the Reynolds textile empire, had been the protagonist of a media scandal when she tried to prematurely take control of part of her father's companies. The family dispute had reached the courts and the tabloids, temporarily tarnishing the family's reputation. As a consequence, her father had decided to remove her from the epicenter of the controversy, sending her to the property of her maternal family, the Thompson house, which had remained closed since Victoria's grandmother's passing. The housekeeper, Mrs. Nancy, tried to lessen the impact of the forced isolation. "The fresh air will do you good, dear, and the internet has already been installed, even though the signal isn't the best." "Slow internet is worse than none," retorted Victoria, leaving her bags in the middle of the dusty living room and walking to the porch where she could see the central square. Her eyes surveyed the place with disinterest until they fixed on the figure of a girl playing with a dog. What caught her attention wasn't the scene itself, but the way the child communicated with the animal exclusively through gestures and expressions. Intrigued, Victoria asked, "Who is that girl in the square?" Mrs. Nancy approached to look. "Oh, that must be Emily, Mrs. Martha's granddaughter. The poor thing was born deaf, but she's a lovely child. Everyone here looks after her as if she were their own daughter." Victoria studied the girl for a few more seconds, without showing any emotion, before turning back to the interior of the house. "I'm going to need something to distract me in this middle of nowhere. Go get my laptop from the car." The news of the arrival of the city girl spread quickly through the village. Everyone wanted to know who that young woman in expensive clothes and distant gaze was who had moved into the Thompson house. Speculations ranged from a celebrity fleeing the paparazzi to a distant relative of the former owners. Mr. Joe, the owner of the only local market, was the one who brought the most concrete information after Mrs. Nancy's visit for groceries. She's the granddaughter of the late Mrs. Olivia Thompson, the only daughter of an important businessman from Boston. She came to spend a season, but it seems she's not very happy to be here. The initial curiosity of the residents soon turned to caution. In the few times that Victoria ventured through the village, her short answers and her evident contempt for the place established an invisible barrier between her and the inhabitants of Pine Valley. Only one person seemed indifferent to the intimidating aura of the newcomer, Emily. Whenever their paths crossed, the girl smiled and waved to Victoria's visible irritation, who deliberately ignored her. What no one imagined was that an old German shepherd without an official owner, known to all as Brave, had developed a strange affection for little Emily. The dog, who had roamed freely through the village for years, had begun to accompany the girl on her wanderings like a silent guardian. On a particularly hot afternoon, while Victoria was trying in vain to improve the internet signal on the porch, she spotted Emily crossing the square toward the trail that led to the small woods on the outskirts of the village. The girl was carrying her notebook and some colored pencils, clearly intending to draw amid nature. Boredom and frustration took hold of Victoria. 3 weeks in that isolated place had already exhausted her meager reserves of patience. Without thinking much, she got up and began to follow the girl at a distance. If there's nothing to do in this place forgotten by God, at least I can discover where this little girl hides every day, she muttered to herself, calculating her steps to avoid being noticed. What Victoria didn't notice was that, while she was following Emily, she herself was being observed by a pair of attentive eyes. Brave, the old German shepherd, had sensed her intentions and followed the two at a safe distance, his instincts alert for any suspicious movement. As they delved into the vegetation, Victoria felt a strange mixture of emotions. Part of her questioned what she was doing, pursuing a deaf child out of pure boredom. Another part, however, felt an inexplicable pleasure in secretly observing someone so vulnerable, so unaware of her presence. The woods, with their century-old trees and narrow trails, held secrets that the inhabitants of Pine Valley knew well. Among them, an old stone well, a remnant of a farm that had existed there long before the village. The place, although known, was avoided by residents due to the danger it represented. Emily found her favorite spot in the woods, a small clearing, where sunlight filtered through the leaves, creating golden patterns on the ground covered with dry leaves. There, the girl sat on a flat rock and opened her notebook, beginning to draw with the concentration characteristic of children absorbed in their world. Hidden behind a leafy tree, Victoria observed, there was something disturbing about the peace that emanated from that child. How could someone deprived of such a fundamental sense seem so complete? Life in Pine Valley obviously didn't offer the comforts and glamour that Victoria was accustomed to, but the local population, especially that little girl, seemed to possess something that she couldn't identify. So pathetic, she whispered to herself, as she moved a little closer to see what the girl was drawing. A dry branch cracked under her expensive feet, alerting Emily, who quickly looked up. For a moment, their gazes met, the girl's, curious and fearless, Victoria's, surprised at having been discovered. The heiress felt an impulse to retreat, but something kept her there, facing the child. Emily smiled and gestured, inviting her to come closer. Victoria hesitated, but eventually took a few steps forward, stopping at a safe distance. The girl turned her notebook, showing the drawing she was making, an impressively detailed reproduction of the central square of the village, with all the colorful houses and the gazebo in the center. "You draw well for a child," commented Victoria, momentarily forgetting that the girl couldn't hear her. Emily smiled more broadly and wrote something in her notebook, tearing out the page and extending it to Victoria. On the small sheet, in childish but legible handwriting, was written, You are beautiful like a fairy tale princess." Something stirred inside Victoria, a strange and uncomfortable emotion. She reluctantly took the paper, read it, and tried to smile, but the result was more of a grimace than a genuine smile. "Thank you, I guess," she responded mechanically, crumpling the paper and putting it in her pocket. The girl didn't seem offended. She continued smiling and made some gestures that Victoria didn't understand. Then she took the notebook again and began to draw, occasionally looking up to observe the newcomer, as if including her in her creation. Victoria suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable before those childish eyes that seemed to see beyond her facade of sophistication. The discomfort grew, until it became unbearable. "Stop looking at me like that," she exclaimed, her voice involuntarily rising. Emily, of course, didn't hear the words, but she caught the change in Victoria's facial expression. Her smile faltered, transforming into a confused expression. It was at that moment that a low growl cut through the air. Brave emerged from the bushes, positioning himself between the girl and Victoria, his posture clearly protective. The dog wasn't showing its teeth, but its entire body communicated a silent warning. "Get out of here, mongrel!" Victoria took a step back, surprised by the animal's appearance. Emily, perceiving the tension, immediately stroked the dog and made signs to calm him. Brave relaxed slightly, but kept his eyes fixed on Victoria as if assessing her intentions. The heiress felt ridiculous, intimidated by a deaf child and a stray dog. She turned around and began to walk back to the trail, but stopped upon realizing that she didn't recognize the path. In her haste to follow Emily, she hadn't paid attention to the turns they had taken in the woods. Reluctantly, she turned back to the girl. "Hey, you!" she called, before realizing again that the girl couldn't hear her. Frustrated, Victoria approached once more, making exaggerated gestures that she hoped would be understood as a request for help to find the way back. Emily observed her for a few moments, then nodded and began to put her materials away in the small backpack she carried. With the dog still vigilant, the girl began to guide Victoria along the trail. The situation was surreal. The heiress of the Reynolds Empire following a deaf child and a stray dog through the woods in rural Virginia. If someone had predicted this to her a few weeks earlier, Victoria would have laughed and called the person crazy. As they walked, Victoria couldn't help but notice how Emily seemed perfectly synchronized with the environment around her. The girl occasionally stopped to point out something interesting: a hummingbird, a rare flower, the curious design formed by the roots of a tree. For someone deprived of hearing, her other senses seemed amplified. Gradually, Victoria realized that they were moving away from the direction she believed to be the right one. "Wait, it's not that way," she tried to say, making gestures to indicate another direction. Emily shook her head negatively and continued on the path she had chosen. Victoria felt the irritation grow again, this time mixed with a touch of anxiety. They were delving deeper into the woods, and the sun was beginning to descend on the horizon. That's when the girl stopped abruptly and held Victoria's arm, making an emphatic gesture for her to look at the ground. There, partially covered by dry leaves, was the stone opening of the old well. If they had followed the direction Victoria had indicated, she certainly wouldn't have seen it and could have fallen. The heiress felt a shiver run down her spine. That child had just prevented her from suffering a potentially serious accident. "Thank you," she said, this time with sincerity, even knowing that the word wouldn't be heard. Emily smiled and made a simple gesture that seemed to say, "You're welcome." Then she carefully skirted the well and resumed walking, followed by Brave and by a suddenly reflective Victoria. When they finally emerged from the woods and the village became visible in the distance, Victoria felt unexpected relief. The girl stopped, indicating that from there Victoria could go on alone. "Aren't you coming?" she asked instinctively. Emily made a gesture indicating that she would go in another direction, probably to her grandparents' house. Before turning, however, she tore a new page from her notebook and handed it to Victoria. It was a quick drawing made during the walk. Victoria, Emily, and Brave walking together along the trail. Below it was written, "New friends." Victoria looked at the drawing for a long moment, feeling a confusion of emotions that she couldn't name. Part of her wanted to crumple the paper as she had done with the previous one, but something stopped her. Instead, she carefully folded it and put it in her pocket. "See you later then," she said, raising her hand in a hesitant wave. Emily waved energetically in response, her smile as bright as the sun that was now setting, painting the sky of Pine Valley with golden and purple hues. The girl then moved away, with Brave faithfully trotting at her side. Victoria stood there watching them until they disappeared around a bend in the path. Something had changed inside her. A small crack had opened in the armor of indifference, that she had built over the years. She couldn't explain what it was, but she felt compelled to explore that sensation further. In the days that followed, Victoria began to observe the village and its inhabitants more attentively. From her porch, she followed the movements in the central square, the interactions of the residents, the peculiar rhythm of that community so different from the competitive environment to which she was accustomed. Particularly, she observed Emily. The girl seemed to be the beating heart of the village, connecting with everyone through her silent but eloquent language. Victoria realized that, while she herself was avoided and treated with caution by the local inhabitants, Emily was universally loved. During one of her morning observations, a curious fact caught her attention. Brave, the dog that seemed to be the girl's designated protector, frequently left her to make rounds through the village, as if fulfilling a surveillance routine. And to Victoria's astonishment, one of these rounds brought him to the Thompson house. The German shepherd stopped in front of the gate of the Thompson house, sat on his hind legs, and observed Victoria, who was having her breakfast on the porch. His deep, intelligent brown eyes fixed on the young woman as if they could assess her soul. "What do you want?" asked Victoria, uncomfortable with that canine scrutiny. Brave slightly tilted his head without averting his gaze. There was something almost human in the way the dog observed her, a consciousness that went beyond animal instinct. Mrs. Nancy appeared on the porch, carrying more coffee. "He shows up here from time to time," commented the housekeeper, placing the thermos on the table. "Before you arrived, I used to leave some food for him. He's a good dog, protects everyone in the village." "I don't like dogs," Victoria responded dryly, turning her attention back to her cell phone, where she was unsuccessfully trying to update her social media with the precarious internet signal. Mrs. Nancy sighed, already accustomed to the young woman's temperament. "If I may comment, Miss Victoria, perhaps you should try to get to know some of the people here. They're good people, you know. They could make your stay more pleasant." Victoria looked up from her cell phone, ready to give a cutting response, but something stopped her. The housekeeper's words didn't sound like criticism, but like sincere advice, laden with a genuine concern that she rarely experienced in Boston. "Maybe," she simply responded, surprising both herself and Mrs. Nancy with that minimal concession. That same afternoon, contrary to her habits, Victoria decided to walk through the village. She didn't have a specific destination in mind, just the vague intention of exploring the place that would be her temporary home. To her surprise and annoyance, she noticed that Brave was following her at a respectful distance. "Go away!" she ordered, making dismissive gestures with her hand. The dog remained where he was, observing her with those eyes that seemed to contain the wisdom of an elder. Frustrated, Victoria continued her walk, deciding to ignore the animal. Her steps naturally led her to the central square, where some children were playing under the supervision of their mothers or grandmothers. Among them was Emily, who was drawing in the gazebo while occasionally looking up to observe the other children. Victoria hesitated, not knowing if she should approach. The girl had been kind to her in the woods, but the heiress wasn't accustomed to interacting with children. Before she could decide, Brave passed by her and trotted to Emily, who smiled widely upon seeing him and hugged him with evident affection. It was then that the girl spotted Victoria. Her smile, far from diminishing, seemed to widen even more. She waved enthusiastically, inviting her to approach. Feeling the curious gazes of the other people in the square, Victoria walked hesitantly to the gazebo, where Emily was already making room for her on the wooden bench. The girl extended her notebook, showing what she was drawing. A surprisingly accurate portrait of Brave, capturing not only his physical appearance but something of his vigilant essence. "You have talent," commented Victoria, this time remembering to gesture and point to the drawing while speaking so that the girl could understand the compliment. Emily smiled, proud, and quickly wrote in her notepad, "You could also draw with me." The proposal caught Victoria by surprise. How long had it been since she had drawn? Probably since childhood, before etiquette, piano, and French classes filled her schedule at her parents' command. "I don't know how to draw," she responded, once again remembering to gesture. Emily shook her head, as if disagreeing, and wrote, "Again, everyone knows how to draw, they just need to try." There was something so simple and true about those childish words that Victoria found herself accepting the pencil that the girl offered her. Sitting there, in the gazebo of a square in the countryside, the heiress of the Reynolds Empire began to draw, hesitantly, the profile of the church that stood on the other side of the square. Time seemed to slow down as the two drew side by side, occasionally, exchanging glances and smiles. Brave remained lying at their feet, apparently satisfied with that unlikely partnership. That's how Mrs. Martha found them when she came to get her granddaughter for dinner. The grey-haired lady with a gentle face stopped, surprised upon seeing the scene. "Good afternoon," she greeted, approaching slowly. "You must be the granddaughter of Mrs. Olivia Thompson. I'm Martha Stevens, Emily's grandmother." Victoria suddenly became conscious of the unusual situation in which she found herself and of the evaluative, though kind, gaze of the lady. "Victoria Reynolds," she responded, extending her hand in a formal gesture that seemed out of place in that environment. Mrs. Martha shook her hand warmly. "Emily seems to have made a new friend," she commented, smiling at her granddaughter, who was attentively watching the conversation, trying to read the lips of the two. "It's the first time I've seen her interact with someone from the big city since her parents moved away." There was a note of sadness in the last part of the phrase that didn't go unnoticed by Victoria. Before she could respond, Mrs. Martha continued, "Would you like to have dinner with us tonight? Nothing very sophisticated, just a home-cooked meal." The invitation was so unexpected that Victoria didn't know how to refuse it, especially when she saw the hopeful look of Emily, who had apparently understood what her grandmother had proposed. Sure, why not?" she responded, feeling strangely anxious. The dinner in the Stevens simple house was a revealing experience for Victoria. The modest residence, with its walls decorated with family photographs and handcrafted pieces, emanated a warmth that she had never felt in the luxurious mansion where she grew up. There, among the aroma of pot roast, collard greens, and homemade bread, Victoria experienced something that she couldn't name, but that resembled belonging. Mr. George, Emily's grandfather, revealed himself to be a born storyteller, entertaining her with accounts of the early days of Pine Valley and the legends that surrounded the region. Mrs. Martha, in turn, made a point of serving generous portions, insisting that Victoria was too skinny and needed to eat better. Emily, obviously, delighted to have her new friend in her house, showed Victoria her room, her toys, and mainly her drawings. One of them caught the heiress's attention, a representation of the old well in the woods, surrounded by a somber aura that contrasted with the generally cheerful tones used by the girl. "Why did you draw the well like this?" asked Victoria, pointing to the drawing and making a questioning expression. Emily took her notepad and wrote, "Dangerous place. Grandma says many people got hurt there." The girl then pointed to another drawing, where she had represented a man fallen near the E. Well, there was something disturbing about the image, a sensation of helplessness that made Victoria feel a shiver. "Who is that?" she questioned, gesturing. Emily's response was disturbing. "The man that nobody helped." Victoria felt a knot in her throat. There was a story there, something that the girl had captured in her heightened perception of the world around her. Before she could ask more, Mrs. Martha called them for dessert, a homemade apple pie that Victoria, despite her concerns with diets, couldn't refuse. Throughout the night, Brave remained on the porch of the house like a sentinel. From time to time, Victoria caught him observing her through the window with that expression that seemed to assess her intentions. When the night advanced and Victoria said goodbye to the Stevens family, a strange reluctance took hold of her. She didn't want to return to the solitude of the Thompson house, to the silence interrupted only by the occasional comment from Mrs. Nancy. "Come back whenever you want, dear," said Mrs. Martha, hugging her as if she were an old friend and not an almost stranger. "Our house is simple, but it's full of love." "Thank you for dinner," responded Victoria, surprised by her own sincerity. It was special. Emily, who had observed the farewell, approached and, unexpectedly, hugged Victoria's waist. It was such a spontaneous gesture, so pure in its intention, that the heiress found herself returning the hug, a sensation of warmth spreading through her chest. The way back to the Thompson house was made in the company of Brave, who seemed to decide that his mission included escorting her safely. Victoria didn't protest this time. Somehow the dog's presence was comforting in the darkness of the starry night. That night marked a subtle but significant change in Victoria. In the following weeks, her visits to the Stevens house became frequent. Gradually, the village that had previously seemed an unbearable exile began to reveal its charms. Emily became her unofficial guide, showing her the most beautiful corners of Pine Valley and teaching her rudiments of ASL. Victoria, in turn, helped the girl with her drawings, buying her better materials in the neighboring town, where she occasionally went in search of supplies and a stronger internet signal. The friendship between Victoria and Emily flourished, to the surprise of the inhabitants of Pine Valley, who began to see the city girl with different eyes. The changes in Victoria were subtle but noticeable. Her tone of voice had become less harsh, her greetings more sincere, her gaze less arrogant. Even Mrs. Nancy noticed the transformation. "The girl is doing you good," she commented one morning while serving coffee. "I've never seen you smile as much as in the last week." Victoria didn't respond, but she knew it was true. There was something in Emily's purity, in the way the girl saw the world, that was slowly transforming her. The notifications from social media, previously her constant obsession, were now barely checked. However, not everything was rosy inside Victoria. As her stay extended and the date of return to Boston approached, a restlessness grew inside her. Her father called regularly, informing about the developments of the family scandal and planning her return to the company. "2 more weeks and everything will be ready for you to return, daughter," he announced during one of the calls. "The press has already found new subjects to occupy themselves with, and your cousins have finally understood who's in charge around here." The news, which weeks before would have filled Victoria with relief, now provoked contradictory sensations. The idea of returning to the busy life of Boston, to corporate meetings and social events, no longer seemed so attractive to her. On a particularly hot afternoon, Victoria found Emily in the square carrying a picnic basket. "Are we going to the woods today?" said the note that the girl handed her, with a drawing of 2 figures holding hands near trees. "Sure, why not?" responded Victoria, helping her carry the basket. As they walked along the now familiar trail, the heiress found herself thinking about how everything would change soon. Leaving the village would mean leaving Emily, the Stevens, and this peace that she had discovered almost accidentally. The realization caused a pang of pain that she hadn't expected to feel. Brave, as always, accompanied them. The dog had become a constant presence in Victoria's life, who no longer protested when he slept at the foot of her bed in the Thompson house. Mrs. Nancy joked, saying that the German Shepherd had adopted Victoria as part of his extended family in Pine Valley. The clearing where Emily liked to draw was even more beautiful that day, with wildflowers blooming in the surroundings and butterflies dancing among the vegetation. The girl spread a colorful cloth on the ground and began to take from the basket the sandwiches prepared by Mrs. Martha, as well as fruits and a homemade cake. As they ate, they conversed in their peculiar way, Victoria speaking and gesturing, Emily responding with expressions, gestures, and occasional written notes. There was a fluidity in that communication that would seem miraculous to anyone observing from outside. "I have something to tell you," said Victoria, hesitating, searching for the right words. "I'll have to go back to Boston soon. My father is resolving some problems there." Emily's smile faltered. Even without hearing the words, the girl perfectly captured the message through Victoria's expression and gestures. Her eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away and took her notepad. "Will you come back to visit us?" she wrote with trembling handwriting. Victoria felt a knot in her throat. "I'll try, but my life there is quite busy," she responded, her voice choked. "Maybe during vacation or some extended holiday." Emily nodded, clearly trying not to show the sadness she felt. She took her notepad again and wrote something that made Victoria's heart ache even more. "I will miss you every day." "I'll miss you too, little one," responded Victoria, impulsively hugging her. They stayed like that for a few moments until Brave, who had explored the surroundings, abruptly returned to the clearing, barking in an agitated manner. The dog's behavior was so unusual that both separated, alarmed. "What's wrong, boy?" asked Victoria, getting up. Emily also stood up, a worried expression on her face. Brave continued barking, running from one side to the other, as if trying to communicate something urgent. That's when they heard voices approaching, male voices and unfamiliar ones. Brave positioned himself protectively in front of the two, the hair on his back bristling. 3 young men emerged from the trail, carrying backpacks and bottles of alcoholic beverages. By the staggering state and altered voices, it was evident that they were intoxicated. They weren't residents of Pine Valley. Victoria had never seen them before. "Look what we have." "Here, hi," exclaimed the tallest of them, a young man in a backwards cap and a t-shirt printed with logos of expensive brands. 2 little kittens lost in the woods. Victoria instinctively placed herself in front of Emily, feeling a mixture of fear and indignation. "We're not lost," she responded firmly, "and you're on private property." The young man laughed, taking another swig from his bottle. "Private property? These woods belong to everyone, Princess. We're just taking a walk, like you." The other 2 laughed, coming closer. Brave continued to growl, increasingly threatening. "Hold that dog," said the second young man, a youth of less threatening appearance but equally altered by alcohol. "He'll end up biting someone." Victoria realized that the situation could deteriorate quickly. Emily behind her held her blouse tightly, clearly frightened by the stranger's posture, even without hearing their words. "Let's go," said Victoria, turning to quickly gather their things. "Emily, get the basket." "Oh, don't go yet," protested the first young man, blocking the path. "The fun is just beginning." He extended his hand to touch Victoria's face, who abruptly withdrew. Brave advanced, growling so threateningly that the young man took a step back. "Get that dog out of here," he shouted, suddenly less confident. The third young man, who until then had remained silent, stepped forward with a dangerous expression. "I'll take care of the dog," he said, pulling a pocket knife from his pocket. Victoria's heart raced. The situation had completely spiraled out of control. "No!" she shouted, pulling Emily and trying to circle around the young men to reach the trail. Brave, perceiving the movement, positioned himself strategically to protect their escape, still growling at the strangers, who hesitated to come any closer. It was at this critical moment that Victoria made an impulsive decision. Instead of following the main trail back to the village, she pulled Emily toward a less used fork, hoping to throw off the young men. "Come on, quick!" she urged, momentarily forgetting that the girl couldn't hear her, but communicating urgency through her gestures and expression. The 2 ran along the narrow trail, with Brave following close behind. Behind them, the shouts and curses of the young men indicated that they were being pursued. Victoria ran in front, pulling Emily by the hand, desperately trying to recall the way back to the village. The trail she had chosen, however, wasn't familiar to her. The low branches scratched her arms and the exposed roots made the path treacherous. "Please, let us be going in the right direction," she muttered to herself, her heart pounding in her chest. That's when she realized that the sounds of pursuit had ceased. Stopping to catch her breath, she looked back and saw no sign of the young men. Brave also seemed to relax a bit, although he still kept his senses alert. "I think we lost them," said Victoria, smiling with relief at Emily. The girl's expression, however, suddenly became alarmed. She pointed frantically at the ground in front of Victoria, trying to communicate some imminent danger. Too late, Victoria realized. They had dangerously approached the old well, partially covered by foliage and almost invisible in the irregular ground of the forest. Her right foot found only emptiness, where she expected to find solid ground. The world seemed to slow down as she desperately tried to regain her balance. Her arms flailed in the air, and her body dangerously tilted over the dark opening. For a terrible moment, Victoria believed she would inevitably fall. But then she felt something. Emily's small hands grabbing her arm with all the strength that a 7-year-old could gather. It wasn't enough strength to prevent her fall, but it was sufficient to alter her trajectory. Instead of falling directly into the well, Victoria fell partially on the stone edge. The pain was immediate and intense, radiating from her leg like an electric current. A scream escaped her lips as she tried to grab onto the surrounding vegetation to avoid slipping into the darkness below. The pain was excruciating. Victoria felt the world spin as she struggled to remain conscious. Half of her body was on solid ground, but her legs dangerously hung over the dark well, supported only by the irregular stone edge and some roots that projected from the internal walls. Emily, in silent panic, clung to Victoria's arm, trying to pull her away from the opening. But her small body didn't have enough strength to move her, and each movement seemed to increase the pain in the heiress's injured leg. Brave, understanding the gravity of the situation, cautiously approached the edge. The dog tried to bite Victoria's blouse to help pull her, but the position was too precarious. "You won't be able to, boy," said Victoria through clenched teeth, cold sweat running down her forehead. "Emily, you need to get help." The girl, although she couldn't hear the words, perfectly understood what Victoria was trying to communicate. Her eyes, bright with contained tears, showed a devastating fear. She shook her head negatively, refusing to leave her. "You need to go," insisted Victoria, trying to smile despite the pain. "I'm safe for now, but I won't be able to get out on my own." Emily continued reluctant, looking alternately at Victoria and at the path back. The indecision was clear on her childish face. The fear of leaving her friend, the fear of not being able to bring help in time. It was Brave who made the decision. With a determined bark, the dog positioned himself next to Emily and began to gently push her in the direction of the trail, as if he understood that only he could remain with Victoria while the girl sought help. Emily finally understood. With tears now freely running down her face, she made one last gesture to Victoria, a movement that the heiress recognized as the promise in ASL of "I'll be back," and departed, running along the trail, quickly disappearing among the trees. "Run, little one," muttered Victoria, feeling the strength beginning to leave her. Brave lay down beside her, his warm body pressed against Victoria's shoulder, offering comfort and stability. The dog's gaze conveyed a clear message: "I won't abandon you." The minutes dragged on like hours. Victoria's position became increasingly unsustainable, the pain in her leg increasing with each breath. She knew she had fractured something, perhaps in multiple places. The blood that stained her pants confirmed that the injury was serious. "We're going to be okay," she said to Brave, or perhaps to herself. "Emily will bring help." But a cruel doubt insinuated itself in her mind. How would a deaf child manage to communicate what had happened? And even if she could, how long would it take until they reached the right place? The sun was beginning to set, plunging the woods into increasingly deep shadows. The night's cold was approaching, and Victoria felt her muscles protest against the constant tension of trying to maintain herself on the edge of the well. At some point, strange thoughts began to fill her feverish mind. She remembered Emily's drawing "The Man That Nobody Helped," and wondered if the same fate awaited her. It was ironic, she thought, that after spending her entire life surrounded by people, she could end up alone in a forgotten place, with only a stray dog as company. "It's not fair," she murmured, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I'm just beginning to understand." Understand what exactly? The value of the simple things she had always despised, the importance of genuine connections she had never allowed herself to form, the silent lessons from a deaf child about true communication. A distant sound interrupted her thoughts. Brave raised his head, ears attentive. It was human voices, still far away but approaching. "Here!" shouted Victoria, gathering her remaining strength. "We're here!" Brave's barks joined her shouts, echoing through the darkening forest. The voices responded, now clearly approaching, in the right direction. Soon the first figure appeared, Mr. George, Emily's grandfather, carrying a flashlight. Behind him came other men from the village, including the young local schoolteacher and Mr. Joe from the market. And there was Emily, safe in Mrs. Martha's arms, her face still marked by crying but illuminated with relief upon seeing that Victoria was still there. "Thank God we found you," exclaimed Mr. George, carefully approaching the well. "Hold on, we'll get you out of there." The rescue was delicate and painful. The men worked carefully, first stabilizing Victoria's body with ropes they had brought, before gently pulling her away from the opening. When they finally placed her on safe ground, the pain almost made her lose consciousness. "The leg is bad," commented Mr. Joe, examining the injury with the knowledge of someone who had seen many accidents in the region. "We need to take her to the hospital in town." They improvised a stretcher with strong branches and coats, and the men took turns carrying Victoria along the path back to the village, where a pickup truck was already waiting to take her to the nearest hospital in the town 25 miles away. Throughout the journey, Emily didn't leave her side, holding her hand tightly. The girl had done something extraordinary. Unable to verbally explain the accident, she had quickly drawn in her notepad the exact location of the well and what had happened, with details so precise that the adults immediately understood the urgency of the situation. She came running to the square, waving the drawing and pulling anyone she found by the hand, explained Mrs. Martha, walking alongside the improvised stretcher. "I've never seen her so determined." At the hospital, the diagnosis confirmed what Victoria already suspected, an open fracture in the tibia. Besides various cuts and contusions, the surgery was immediate, and when she awoke from the anesthesia, she found not only Mrs. Nancy at her side, but also Mr. George and Mrs. Martha. "Where is Emily?" was her first question. "At home sleeping," responded Mrs. Martha with a gentle smile. "She wanted to stay, but it was too late for a child. We promised she would be here first thing in the morning." Victoria nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude, so intense that it made her eyes fill with tears. "She saved me," she said simply. "She and Brave." "That dog has always known how to recognize good people," commented Mr. George, giving gentle pats on Victoria's hand. "Even when they don't yet. No, they're good." The recovery would take time. With her leg in a cast and the recommendation to avoid long trips for at least 6 weeks, Victoria found herself obliged to extend her stay in Pine Valley. Her father, initially annoyed, ended up yielding when she explained the situation and, to her surprise, promised to visit the village as soon as possible to meet the heroes who saved his daughter. The days that followed were of a strange fullness. Installed again in the Thompson house, now with Mrs. Martha coming daily to help with the care, Victoria received constant visits from the residents. Baskets of fruits, homemade breads, traditional sweets, and most importantly, genuine smiles arrived daily at her door. Emily was a constant presence, dividing her time between school and Victoria's house. Together, they rediscovered the pleasure of drawing, now with professional materials that Victoria's father had sent especially for the girl, impressed with her talent even without having met her personally. Brave, as expected, assumed permanent residence on the porch of the Thompson house, leaving only to accompany Emily in her comings and goings. The dog seemed to have found his true vocation as guardian of the two. It was during one of these tranquil afternoons, with Victoria on the porch observing the movement in the square, with her leg elevated on a chair, that Mrs. Martha brought up the subject. "And what do you intend to do when the cast comes off, dear?" The question hung in the air, laden with implications. Victoria looked at Emily, who was playing with Brave in the garden, completely unaware of the conversation that would define her future. "I don't know," she responded with honesty. "My father expects me to return and assume my place in the company, as has always been planned." Mrs. Martha nodded, understanding. "And is that what you want?" The question was simple, but the answer was complex. A few weeks before, Victoria wouldn't have hesitated to affirm that yes, her place was at the top of the corporate hierarchy, commanding employees and closing million-dollar deals. Now, however, something had fundamentally changed inside her. "I think I've discovered another version of myself here," she confessed, surprised by her own sincerity. "Someone who perhaps always existed, but who never had a chance to manifest in Boston." Mrs. Martha smiled, as if she already knew the answer even before the question. "You know, dear, sometimes life puts us exactly where we need to be, even if it's not where we planned to be." That night, after much reflection, Victoria made a decision. She called her father and for the first time in her life expressed her true desires instead of simply acquiescing to his expectations. The conversation was long and, at times, tense, but in the end, they reached an agreement that surprised them both. Victoria would assume the direction of the family's charitable foundation, a branch of the company that had always been treated as a secondary social obligation. Her first project would be to establish a support center for children with hearing impairments in small towns, starting with Pine Valley. When the cast was finally removed and Victoria took her first steps without assistance, a small crowd was waiting in the square to celebrate. Among hugs and tears of joy, she felt truly at home, not in the Thompson house, but in that village that had welcomed her even when she didn't deserve to be welcomed. Emily was the last to hug her, jumping into her arms with an almost wild joy. The girl gave her a new drawing: Victoria, Emily and Brave walking together along a sunny road, with the village of Pine Valley in the background and a large, colorful building next to the school, the Future Support Center. Below the drawing, in a handwriting that had considerably improved in the last few weeks, was written, "Family doesn't need to hear to understand. It just needs to love." Victoria hugged the girl tightly, tears freely flowing down her face. In her arms was not just a child who had taught her more about communication than any oratory course ever could, but also the promise of a different future, a future built on the foundations of what really mattered. The village of Pine Valley, with its colorful houses and its simple people, had witnessed a transformation that no one would have believed possible. The arrogant heiress who had arrived months before no longer existed. In her place was a woman who had learned to listen, even when words weren't being spoken. And Brave, the wise German shepherd without an official owner, sitting at the feet of the two with an almost human look of satisfaction, seemed to know that his mission was complete. He had found not just a family to protect, but also helped create a connection that transcended words, social status, and even sound. In that village in Virginia, nestled among mountains and blessed with flowering dogwoods, everyone now knew that the most powerful sound wasn't that which was heard with the ears, but that which was felt with the heart. And ironically, it had been a girl who had never uttered a word who had taught them this lesson. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Emily and Victoria has touched your hearts as much as it touched ours in creating it. To continue this journey of emotions and reflections, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories that explore unexpected connections and personal transformations. Find it here on the left side of the screen. If this narrative awakens something in you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like to the video. Each day we bring new stories that celebrate human resilience and the capacity to reconnect with what truly matters. And remember, sometimes it's the silent voices that carry the most powerful messages.